Curtis. I'm the Chief Executive, I'm standing right in front of the screen, of the cross-party think tank Demos. We're delighted to have you all here today, and I just wanted to say a few words before we kick off to set the scene of what this conversation's about. Since the beginning of the year, we've been watching everything happening around the world, in America, in parts of Europe, and watching these trends of democratic backsliding and asking questions about what it means in this country and what it means for the quality of our democracy in the UK. And we've been having that conversation as a team in all the research work we're doing at the moment, in the deliberative and participatory work we're doing around the country, and with our wider network. And this network, the Collaborative Democracy Network, is like a really important part of that. So we wanted to open up that conversation to you and to our friends to be part of this conversation. We've come to a few kind of early conclusions for Demos and what we will be doing as part of this, that I just wanted to share our thinking about, because it kind of suggests why we're asking the question we're asking today. Firstly, we think the rise of extreme populism and authoritarianism around the world is the response to a real felt crisis of democracy. People feel the system isn't delivering for them anymore. It's not working in a way that they recognise or would hope democracy to be working. So you can say all of this is a bad thing that we're seeing and these trends are bad, but our aim and our purpose is to get to the drivers of that. What's going wrong? How do we improve democracy to win back trust in that system? And that's the kind of agenda that we've set for ourselves. We think at the heart of this dissatisfaction, and moving more to the UK context now, is a real crisis and dysfunction in the relationship between state and citizen. How everyone from politicians to public sector workers, the way that we're working together is a real grit in the system. People are not experiencing the state on a day-to-day basis in a way that is really working for them, or in a way that works around the realities of their lives. So this chronic lack and loss of trust between state and citizen is at the heart of democratic dysfunction, but also disrupting our ability to make it better. We don't have the collective will to apply our democracy to solving the problems. So we're working on ways and urgent ways to upgrade democracy to fix this broken relationship between state and citizen. And there's lots of different avenues the team members from Demos around the room today are pursuing to think about ways to reconnect state and citizen for these times, to win back trust. So I just wanted to say that's where we're coming from in this subject and why we're asking this question today and why we've got these colleagues with us today. I also want to say we are a cross-party think tank. We engage with all parties to understand the problems and to look for the solutions. We're focusing on one particular part of the system today, but that is an ongoing part of and an important part of our mandate. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for being part of this conversation. I'm going to hand over to Miriam.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, as Polly said, it's fantastic to see so many people here today in the room, and so many people are joining us online as well. Hello to everyone online. Just to say, we're having some slight tech issues back here. It will be sorted by the time the panel starts. Please keep your fingers crossed for us. It'll all be fine. But essentially, we wanted to bring this panel together today to think about what we can learn from the US and from parts of Europe about what happens when people start to lose faith in democracy, because the democratic status quo just isn't working for them anymore. So as Polly said, it feels like we are in a democratic emergency. So far here, unlike in the US, it feels like it's a slow burn rather than a raging conflagration. But what we want to look at today is the response is not just about what's the winning election strategy, like either in the locals that are coming up over the next couple of years or in the national election in the next 4 years, but how politicians of all stripes can do the really long, hard, difficult work to rebuild trust in democracy and to rebuild some of that relationship that is broken between state and citizen. So tonight, I want to talk about what can be done about it. I want this to feel a bit hopeful. Yes, we're going to talk about what's going wrong. Yes, we're going to look at what the lessons need to be, But the real thing we want to get to is like, well, what can we do about it? Is it about democratic reform? Is it about radical disruption to our system? What are some of the answers that we can be talking about that will take us out of this democratic emergency? So I hope we can leave here with a bit of hope, so it feels like what's coming doesn't feel inevitable, that there is change still that is possible. I'm delighted to have a full panel here. This is very good. Phew. This is a really, really fantastic bunch of people who are going to help us answer these questions and think about what the future might look like. So we have the Right Honourable the Baroness Hodge of Barking, DBE. Margaret was MP for Barking from 1994 to 2024 and Minister in Blair and Brown's governments. We've got Peter Hyman joining us from the Project to Counter Far-Right Populism and former Senior Advisor to Keir Starmer from 2022 to 2024, where he worked as a strategist and architect of the government's missions. And Yeva Chesnu-Laitite, researcher, policy analyst and practitioner specialising in democratic innovation at the Max Planck Institute for Comparative Public Law and Public Law and International Law and Democracy Next. So what we're going to do now, usually at these events, you have lots of talking heads. People are going to stand up and talk at you for 5 to 10 minutes, and that's all good. But actually what I thought we could do tonight, because we've got such an amazing panel here, is just have a conversation. So I've got some prompt questions, and what I would like the panellists to do is to respond to the questions and to each other, so this becomes more conversational. Like I say, keep your fingers crossed. We've got Yeva joining online from Helsinki. We believe this is going to be just fine. It's all going to work seamlessly. Yeva, can you actually hear us?
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Thank God. And you can hear Yeva. Is the volume okay at the back? Not really. Can we do anything about that? Possibly. Yeva, you can just say hello again, just so we can get the levels right.
Hello.
Better? Bit better? Good. It's a bit about the same. We'll work on that. Yeah, come and sit at the front. That might be the other way of doing it. So we'll get going. We'll have a conversation. I'll ask all the speakers to speak up and speak into the microphone that they have. And we're going to discuss between us for about half an hour, and then there'll be time for questions from you as well, because we really want to know what your questions would be for this panel, what your thoughts are around the topic. So to get going, so this question for all of you. So what do you think is at the heart of the current crisis in democracy? And you can all be very polite and nobody needs to start, but someone's going to.
We've thought about it.
Well, is that working? Yeah, there are multiple factors. Is the obvious thing to say. I spoke to one person very respected in Washington, in DC, from a think tank, who said, "I can sum it up in one word: performance." The performance of government, and by that he meant something slightly different from delivery, which is what everyone. For him, there was a cluster of issues. Performance meant broken promises, as in you will say something to get elected and you won't actually do it once you're there. For him in America, there was a story of unnecessary wars like Iraq, which had broken trust. The financial crisis and the offshoring of jobs to China was a huge thing, so there was a big economic thing. But basically, the rise of populism, the space for Trump would not have happened if government was performing better, if it was delivering better. So that's one starting point. What I was finding going to a lot of Trump rallies and other things like that was there's obviously there's a heart point as well as a head point. And lots of people now have sort of written about this, which is feeling that you are heard and you're seen. And these fault lines, some of which play out in Britain as well, between educated and non-educated, or college educated and non-college educated, between urban and rural, between the metropolitan elite coasts of California and New York and what's in the Midwest states. But there was a whole series of fault lines, and there was an overwhelming sense in which those metropolitan elites, particularly from the left, were looking down on people, were thinking, not only did you not get to college, but you're living a lifestyle that we don't approve of because it's not woke enough. So a lifestyle where you're gun owning, you're church going, You've got a particular view of the world, and that's not the accepted view of other people. And so what Trump was saying is, I hear you, I see you, and I will literally take a bullet for you. I am the protector of you. And that was very important. The other thing is, I'll finish on this for the moment, is I think the left, and it's true in this country and in America, had lost an aspiration story, both at the level of working people and at the level of the nation. Kamala Harris had no response to MAGA, Make America Great Again. Make America Great Again is a very powerful thing to say, and there was no patriotic story about America, nor was there a story about getting on in life. And people may think, people in a way don't want to acknowledge that what Trump was offering was truly hopeful. You know, the MAGA stuff and what went with it, the fact that he was a businessman, the fact that he implied he would make you better off, was quite a hopeful message. It wasn't just a downbeat grievance message, which we like to believe it was. It was actually properly hopeful. And I think that Democrats in particular need to take note of that.
I'm going to sort of come at this from, and I think that's why I'm here, from my experience in fighting the extreme right in Barking in my constituency in 2010, and in the run-up to that. Just to give you a little bit of history, in 2006, the BNP was already sort of quite well established in the borough. They ran 12 candidates in the local authority elections, won 11 seats, so they just lost one of the seats. And if they had run 51 candidates, we would have had a BNP council. We would have had first extreme right council in the UK. And then if we hadn't done, which we'll come to later, what we did over the following 4 years, there would have been a BNP MP in Barking. And I want to take you back because it resonates so much to what happened today. When I arrived in Barking, they said that they were used to sort of, they said, go off to Westminster, Margaret, have a good time, enjoy yourself. Don't worry about what's happening down here. And I'd spent 20 years in community politics, so that was quite an attractive proposition. So I did do that. And they were used to, they used to weigh the votes in. They didn't even bother to count them in. And then all sorts of things started happening in their lives. And there is resonance to this. So when I arrived, 94, I walked out of the tube station and it was completely white. And I had never met in those early years so many great-grandmothers who lived within 10 minutes of their great-grandchildren. So it was a very close-knit white community. And Ford's was the local employer. And at its height, it was employing 50,000 people. Today, it employs 2,000. And the council owned everything. 98% of the housing was pre-right to buy. The council owned 98% of the housing. And you had a very small, inward-looking Labour Party that didn't do any campaigning. I mean, I remember my first election day, they spent their time talking to the opposition on the polling booth. They didn't talk to the voters, and you were lucky if you got one leaflet through the door. So it was an old-style, inward-looking Labour Party, old industry, and you all had a council housing. Now, it changed very rapidly. Because as the housing was privatised, people then it started becoming a multiracial borough, and now you can't tell the difference between Barking and Lambeth. They're very, very similar, but that happened over a generation. So there was a real change in people's, in their experience of who was in their community. 2001, I'm sorry if it bang on, tell me to shut up if I'm going on too long. 2001 was really interesting because 2001, the turnout at the election was sort of 46%, and I was worried. I arrived in 94, 2001, I thought, sugar, I can't keep on ignoring this and just enjoying myself in Westminster. And we did a little bit of research. Deborah Mattinson was a friend of mine. We did a few focus groups and we did a bit of research on a really difficult estate. And what came out of that, which has resonance today, was it wasn't apathy that was keeping people at home, it was anger. And that is, again, if you look at turnouts in the UK in 2019, they were very low. And I think it's that similar danger. And then when the BNP came along, there was somewhere to locate their anger. but it was anger at feeling that the relationship between the state and the citizen had completely and utterly collapsed. I remember one woman saying, "If I were mayor, I'd tell them what to do." It was that sort of fury at our failure to do what to do, and I can go on and on, but I think then, having recognised that, so what started as a protest, I think rather quickly then transformed into, because they were angry about the change in immigration, we weren't building any council houses, so that as the housing got privatised, and now sort of probably a third of the housing remains in council ownership. As the housing got privatised, there were no opportunities for people to have housing there. The jobs in Fords went, everything went. That quality of life was impossible, and we were not in contact with it. And I just want to end on this, that I'll say how we handled it, but I completely changed the way I did my politics, and I'm now trying to persuade my colleagues in Parliament to do likewise. And my Bible was a book by Tip O'Neill, which said all politics is local. And that was really, I'll carry on later about that, otherwise I'm going on too much. But that was an absolute, for me, transformative bit of thought about how to tackle the complete breakdown of trust in the Labour Party and in the political class.
Thank you. So we've got poor performance by government, we've got kind of taking voters for granted and voter anger. Yeva, from your perspective of having done lots of work in Eastern and Central Europe, what do you think the kind of the heart of the democratic crisis is?
Yeah, indeed, building on some of the things that were said that resonated for me, coming from Lithuania and knowing better the Central and Eastern European context, I think here we're experiencing a crisis of belonging and agency in a way that the global challenges we're facing today are overwhelming, they're complex, long-term, they're emotionally heavy, and they're causing all sorts of fear, uncertainty, and denial amongst people. And they require us to be able to hold this complexity and be in it together, to work through it together. And authoritarian populists, especially in our region, are able to tap into these feelings. Their tactics propose simple solutions that disadvantage some groups that are divisive, but provide a sense of control to a certain group, a superiority, and a certain belonging for that group, and in a way fracturing society. And so what I think we kind of have to do about this is we can also be building this belonging through inclusion, not through exclusion and fracture. And we can show that winner takes all, which is now seems the reality of today, especially living bordering Russia. This is really not the only way to see the world. There are different ways that we can be doing that, and that is already happening in the region. I also think another element is the kind of the failure for our democratic systems to evolve and adapt to the needs of today and to the developing landscape. And I'm kind of hopeful that in Central and Eastern Europe, because we have rather new and young democratic institutions, they are still flexible and young enough to be able to perhaps adapt and show what can be done compared to other contexts where that rigidity is a bit more embedded and stronger. So I would say these are the two things.
Before we come on to kind of what that kind of flexibility or evolution might look like, can you say more about what's happening in like particular Central Eastern or Central European or Eastern European countries, and kind of how it's moved so fast, or kind of what was the germ of the beginning of authoritarianism in those areas?
Well, the kind of history is a little bit complex because after the independence, around 30 years ago, many countries in the region kind of all went through the process of democratization that left some things still to be desired. So there are still some prevailing corruption, some lack lack of transparency and things like that. And at the same time, to understand the situation as well, we're grappling with the covert interference of Russian colonial intentions to also exacerbate that fracture and to also kind of create opportunities for the populist leaders to rise. So we've seen, of course, Poland and kind of all of the dismantling of various democratic institutions there. That is now, it seems it's been doing better, but since the last election, the situation is again a little bit uncertain, as well as, of course, Hungary, and lately we've seen what's been happening in Georgia, Moldova, etc. So we are in a moment where I feel the risk of authoritarian populists gaining more and more power is really, really strong, especially amidst the sort of ongoing geopolitical uncertainty and the collective trauma of the past that exacerbates these feelings even more. So perhaps I'll leave here.
Thank you. Do you think, and this is to everyone, you could say more about what the appeal is? What is the appeal of a populist party or a populist leader that are existing, say here, two main parties? What appeal do they not have that a populist party might have? What do you think attracts people towards it?
Promises? I'm sorry. First of all, people. It's because of their quality of life at the moment. So you can cost of living at the moment in the UK. So it's building on people's sort of angst and feeling of and without a positive message, which is what you talked about, that exacerbates the feeling of they're missing out in some way and life isn't giving them a fair chance. I think that's what it is. And then it's exploiting the scapegoats for that angst. So, I mean, I think the most dangerous, immigration is obviously high and top of that in most of the populist areas where populism is rising. And for me, the mistake we make in the UK, and we didn't make it in when we were fighting the BNP, is endless promises that you never keep, because all that does is reinforce people's lack of trust in politics. So promising you're going to cut. Stop. I can't remember what Sunak was. Stop the boats. We're going to stop. And what's ours? Stop the.
A version of smash the gangs.
Smash the gangs, right? Stop the boats. Smash the gangs. Neither are going to succeed, and bluntly, and therefore all you're doing is reinforcing the lack of trust that there is in it, and you don't start building trust. I think you're in incredibly dangerous territory. So you've got to don't try and out-populize the populists, or whatever the word is. I think, and that's the temptation is, because these are issues that people are feeling very strongly about. That's the way in which you build trust, and we just didn't do that, and I don't think we should be doing that today. Actually, at this point in time, if I can talk about UK, I would not. I'd ignore Farage and focus on the positive rebuilding of trust. Then as you come closer to the election, obviously, then you can think about how best to tackle him. But at this point, if I'm right about being anger and protest, at this point, you've got to tackle that anger and protest by rebuilding confidence in mainstream politics.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing we've got to be careful of is the sort of accusation always about sort of, are you chasing Farage and are you sort of obsessed with him and all the rest of it. And I think we've got to distinguish between stuff that's clearly sort of aping that rhetoric or genuinely is chasing him, and policy stuff which the public care about and has to be dealt with. So the boats have to be dealt with, because it's the first duty of government to know who is coming in the country. That's different from planned immigration, and we can have a debate about how much immigration you want. But the reason that Denmark, Canada and Australia have got progressive governments, there are other factors as well, is boats are off the table. when I asked an Australian who's very close to, a sort of political guru over there, why is there no populist party in Australia? He said, because the boats have been dealt with. And he said, the irony is we've got far higher immigration than we had before, but we haven't got that visceral thing about whoever wants to can land in our country and we've no idea. So there's that basic control and security. Now, saying you've got to deal with the boats is not chasing Farage. It's what the public want. And if you don't take it off the table, then Farage effectively will win. So that is a starting point. The other thing is, in terms of the popularity, so the best political event I've been to, and I've been to a lot, was the Farage rally that I went to in Birmingham to launch the local elections. Okay, why was it good? It was good because, and I compared it with what we did in opposition for Labour. We have in an audience 400 people who are handpicked, who within an inch of their life, totally loyal, and all the rest of it. It's a very political, overly political, a warm-up. The warm-up is not some sort of humorous warm-up. It's a series of other political speeches to warm up for the main political speech, which is then Keir Starmer, the leader. What was this in Birmingham? This was 8,000 people on the Friday night, not 400. It was a Friday night, so to attract people on a sort of going-out night, this was a going-out night. It was a blend, which I'd learned from America, of entertainment and politics. So you had 8,000 people. I'm a paid-up Labour Party member, and I just went on Eventbrite and went on. So they didn't mind who turned up. You could get a beer in your hand and go into the auditorium. It was fairly chilled. And there they had an amazing set. They had a graffitied bus shelter, a pub that was closing, a barber shop, Keir's Cuts. He'll cut everything apart from your taxes. A cinema with some spoof posters, which were very amusing. They had a warm-up guy from talk radio sort of getting the audience going and being funny. So there was a lot of humour involved. And then Nigel Farage comes on a JCB digger to a great fanfare and does a speech. And it was a good night out, okay? And it was a fun thing. As I say, 8,000 people, real buzz. You felt as if this was a party with a bit of vigour about it, a bit of excitement, trying to build a movement, and all the rest of it. And that for me is a symbol of how the mainstream parties are playing a completely different game. That hasn't got any of this, that is too risk averse, that doesn't communicate properly, that isn't trying to bring in a wide audience. There's an 18-year-old I talked to who'd come all the way from Glasgow, this Birmingham event, on his own, because he was just sort of energised by it. And so it just felt like a different thing. And so there's a whole thing about, when I was at the Trump rallies, this is a movement. And it's got all the paraphernalia of a movement. It's got the MAGA caps that I bought to blend in. I'm not sure it works. My English accent slightly gave me away, but I was there with my MAGA hat. But it's got all the stuff around it. There's a culture around it. There's a way of, chanting USA, USA and all the rest of it. We can all think that's slightly, whatever. But it's part of, so there's something going on here, and I don't think...
It's like a religious rally.
Yes, yes. And you can say, and it echoes if you like looking at, Nuremberg rallies or whatever, you can say there's, a bit of it. But actually there's something going on here that is very different and feels like a different party. And the final thing I'll just say on this is the biggest, you can say it's all about immigration, Farage. It's not since the election. There's been a 10 to 15% rise, as you know, from the polls and the elections in the reform support. And most of that, the vast majority, is now a get things done support. As in, we've tried the Tories for 14 years, they failed. We've tried Labour, they haven't been in quite a year, but it looks like they're going to fail as well. So it's this conversational thing which is deadly, which is, so what have we got to lose? Farage can't be any worse. And the number of people who have surprised me, because I never thought their politics would go in this direction, who say, well, he can't be any worse than what we've had, is the really difficult thing for us to now counter.
Can I come in on that? There are two things. I mean, I think that takes me back to, you have to, instead of attacking him, rebuild trust in you. that you can get things done, so and not focus so much on him. And what I'd say about the immigration, I think maybe you've got an answer to this all, but we're not. I think it's really difficult to stop the boats. So if you're constantly going to say that and then you fail, you just reinforce it. So I would tackle the immigration in a completely. When was the last time that a mainstream politician did a really? Well, I do it on three things. So let me start on this one. When it was last time that a mainstream politician really gave a positive discourse around immigration? And what for me plays on this is that I remember, I'm old enough to remember 97, and I remember pre-97 when Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as society. And I was really worried that when we came in, that we couldn't transform that culture and belief in there's no such thing as society. But there was such a determined effort by both Gordon Brown and Tony Blair to do that. It worked. And I think this is not the only thing I do, but I think if only the politicians had a sort of, and so I say that as one as myself, had that confidence to make a positive message is important. Then on the delivery side, I mean, I because I'm skeptical of our being able to stop all the boat smugglers. I think there's two things that what people they do want to know that we can control our borders. That's what's important. We can control our borders. And what we should be doing, why the heck we can't get the Home Office simply to process applications in a time that was 6 weeks or 6 weeks. Sorry, my blasted phone going off. Why we can't get them to process properly? That would be my number one priority. I think that is something that is sortable. And then the other thing, which we had embarking in 2010, and I still think is right, if people come here and you do this positive, their contribution that they can make to our society, if they break our rules, they should go. And that's a sort of, that plays to the sort of feeling that my Barking residents felt it was unfair. There was an unfairness in the system. And if you can tackle that feeling of unfairness by saying, right, you're here, we welcome you, you're great, you can contribute. But if you come here, play by the rules, and if you break the rules, you go. And you really implement that more strongly. I think we could deliver on those two things in relation, and that would show control over immigration. Whereas my fear is that it's all very well, we've got to get rid of the boats, but I've just no bleeding idea how we do it.
So we've talked about kind of what the appeal of populists are. We've talked about kind of what's happening in the States, what's happening in Farage rallies in Birmingham. But if we're kind of going up a level and just thinking about, well, democracy is not working for people are losing faith in it, there's this broken contract between citizen and state. What do you think some of the building blocks are for building a much more workable, believable in democracy so people can really trust it again? Yeva, do you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, for me, these are kind of things that create the agency and belonging that we're lacking that I mentioned, and also strengthen the resilience of democracy, because I think also this is something we kind of we need to be thinking about. By resilience, I mean the ability to adapt, and the ability to bounce back, which I think our current democratic institutions are lacking. And so some of those blocks, well, I see a kind of a deliberative and participative ecosystem of ways for people to get involved beyond just elections, that would be at the heart of the new ways of seeing democracy and a kind of new kinds of democratic institutions, such as citizen assemblies, participatory budgets, and all of the whole diversity of ways for people to engage in a meaningful way, to be representative in a different way, to have a say and to feel that their voice matters in a way that communicates. And that's my kind of second suggestion for a building block would be the horizontal political culture, because in a way, our electoral system at the moment, I think, communicates that not everybody is worthy and capable of leading and participating. Only those that are most educated, that have the opportunity. And through this sort of a new kind of democratic institutions based on sortition, on deliberation, on participation, I think we would send a message that absolutely everyone is part of the collective solution. Their point of view matters, that we are capable all and able to come together to conclusions that satisfy most of us. And in a way, I think it would be not only beneficial to our political and democratic system, sending that sort of message, but also to our mental well-being. And going away from that sort of competitive, adversarial, exclusionary system that just reaffirms this false belief that sense of security comes at the expense of others. I think it's a first step.
I think there's some basic minimums. So, in this country, your vote doesn't count equally because there's only a certain, about 200,000 or 300,000 votes that actually really matter in swing seats, and that's just unacceptable. So if we're talking about one of the reasons for the rise of populism is people don't think they've got agency. You've got to end up with a one person, one vote meaning something, a version of proportional representation. There's now no excuse not to do that. Otherwise, you're just corrupting democracy. In this country, we've obviously got the quirks of an absurd House of Commons and an even more absurd House of Lords, which I know you're now finding as you've got there. So we've got a sort of completely ridiculous system. In America, of course, people are rebelling against the Electoral College. Because in quite a few of the recent elections, I mean, this one, Trump actually won the Electoral College and the popular vote, but you can win the Electoral College and lose handsomely the popular vote. So Hillary Clinton obviously won by 2 or 3 million the popular vote and wasn't president. So they're also looking at their system that doesn't work. We've also got an absurd way of thinking about democracy, which is you vote every 4 or 5 years and then you that's it. And that's because MPs, again, I don't know your thoughts on that, I think have got this thing about they're the representatives. So again, it's all about them and it's not about voters in between. And Polly and Demos brought over Audrey Tang, who some of you may know is the digital minister for Taiwan, and she's done extraordinary things in terms of participatory democracy and getting people to deliberate, and it's the deliberative stuff, but deliberate on key issues. And also she sends out every month a way of getting people to say what their feelings are on a given subject. So she's tapping in not just to the logic of arguments, but also the feeling and sort of marrying the two together. So there's a level of sophistication in what she's doing. I thought, because I wasn't very good on my sort of geography or populations, that it was a very small country in terms of population, 5 or 6 million, therefore we're 60 million, or wouldn't work, but they're 22, 25 million. So it's, Taiwan, to say it can work there but not here, I think we can bring a lot of that way of doing things over here. And she's got other things like radical transparency. So when she has a meeting, she just publishes it online. I mean, she obviously tells the person first, but everything she does, she's getting the public. And it's not that everyone will want to access all her meetings, because some of them, I imagine, are quite dry, but it's the principle of doing that starts to have a new way of thinking about democracy. So all of these things, I think we've got to do, and we can't be complacent. We've got to do a lot to save democracy, I think.
Well, I agree with all of that. So I'm just going to add value. I agree with both the participatory. I think it's brilliant. When we did that on pensions, do you remember? That was a really, really, on pension reform, it worked absolutely brilliantly well. And I also agree with everything Pete said. But I'm going to add value to it. So after 2006, when I decided, right, I really had to take it on, I had completely changed the way I did my politics. Absolutely transformed the way I did my politics. And everything I did, and I did until I stopped being an MP, had to help me to reconnect. I always used to talk about my reconnection test. So going to party meetings was a waste of space. Going to trade union meetings was a waste of space. Cutting ribbons at the town hall was a waste of space. Those things that MPs traditionally do, I completely stopped doing. And then I thought, how do I connect? And I was helped actually by Margaret Madonna, who was the General Secretary of the Labour Party at the time. And basically, it was so connection was the aim. So the first, I had sort of what became a virtuous circle. The first thing was to communicate with people directly. So one of my techniques, I'll talk about one was I would write to 1,000 people. We were very focused, if I can say, in this room. We only wrote to people who'd voted in one of the last 3 elections. We wanted a win. I wouldn't, if you're democratizing, I might do it a bit differently. But so we only voted if they did. We didn't want people to write to people who weren't going to vote. We wrote to 1,000 people, asked them to come and have a cup of tea with me. We then had set up in a local church hall, little tables like this, and they all got a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit and a custard cream to show that we really cared about them. And then I went, so I had communicated, they'd had a letter from M. Hodge. 1,000 people had had a letter. Then I went round, and this is the slightly different. I never set the agenda. So I'd always say, what's bugging you? What's on the top of your mind? And that's where all politics is local. That doesn't mean it's just local issues. If national issues hit that local environment, they are important. So for me, immigration came up all the time and housing came up all the time, but also street cleaning, blah, 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 blah. And I'd spend an hour going round just chatting to people. And there was always a local issue that would come up. And then I bring everybody. So what I'd done is communicated. Second thing was I had listened. And then I brought everybody together and we talked about the local issue. And there's always something you can do about the local issue. You may not be able to solve it, but there's something you can do. And we talked about what I could do. So I was acting. And then I went away. I'm going to come back to immigration just a little bit. I would act on the local issue. So communicate, listen, act. And then I'd write to the 1,000 people again, although only 50 showed up, but I'd write to the 1,000 people again saying, thanks for coming for my coffee afternoon. You raised the issue about the road humps. This is what we're going to do about it. See you at the next coffee afternoon. And that virtuous circle of communicating, listening, acting, communicating helped me build trust. And as far as immigration went, which was the sort of big issue, of course, I developed a spiel around it. And all I can do is tell you one or two things. I never promised, as I said, I never promised we'd go back to the old barking when it was all white. And the BNP one of the things they did was use pictures of, the barking market in 1950, which was all white, compared to the barking market in 2005, which had sort of people with hijabs and what have you on. I never promised I'd do that. I'd explain why it had happened and then say, I want to make it work for all of you. And sometimes that worked. Usually it didn't, but it started a conversation. I'll just relate one incident. There was an area, very, very BNP area, where we got 3 BNP councillors. And I started this spiel. And this woman got up and started screaming at me. A woman about 50 or 60 saying, you're not listening to us, Margaret. They're all coming in here, all these asylum seekers, and can't get an appointment to the hospital, and they're all benefit scroungers. So she sat down, I did my spiel, it didn't work. And then a white man got up who was about sort of late 50s, and he said, I've been on benefits for 25 years. I run out of money at the end of every month. I'd love to work. I can't, don't call me a scrounger. And then a Caribbean guy got up and he said, I've been here. He was a Windrush guy. I've been here. My girls went to university. I'm British. And he sits down. And then a couple of the BNP lot got up. One said, my son's just come back from Afghanistan. It was about that time. You're not giving him a house. And the other one said, my daughter's at home and you've put goodness knows what, you've put an asylum seeker next door, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the afternoon, I thought I better go up to the woman who'd started this all. So I went up to her and said, just to say, are you all right? And she said, I was knackered. So I said to her, are you all right? She said, I do want to talk to you, Margaret, but I want to go and apologise to those 2 people. And she went and apologised to the white man. And it was a sort of and I had lots of powerful moments like that. So, but I'm never lying, but engaging in that conversation and doing that sort of virtuous thing of communicating, listening, acting, communicating, you really, really, really built trust. And we did in all sorts of other ways. So when we canvassed, we never went, hello, I'm from the Labour Party. How, are you going to vote Labour next time? We went, I'm from the Margaret Hodge Action Team. Did you know she'd put a bench up in the local park? And what else would you like her to do? All politics starts from the local. It's all this. What else would you like her to do? Then we'd engage in a conversation about what else would you like her to do? And at the end, we say, by the way, we are also trying to find out whether you voted in the last election, knowing they had, because we only knocked on doors of people who'd voted. And you got a much more honest response that way. And I'll end you with a very funny story, because we were desperate. I really did think that Griffin could win at one point. So I was knocked on the door of this Lithuanian, and Eastern Europeans haven't got great confidence in voting because it didn't change much in their country. So I spent a quarter of an hour with this guy saying to him, you've got to vote, Mark. Otherwise your Griffin's going to send you home. At the end of the quarter of an hour, he said to me, all right, Margaret, I will vote for you, but you've got to do something for me. So I said, well, try me and I'll see whether I can do it. So he said, you've got to get rid of all those Romanians.
So I feel like we've talked a bit about kind of what can be done, whether that's kind of radical listening and communicating, whether that's more deliberation, kind of it builds an effective political case for political parties so they actually think about some of these more radical changes that could be made, or something. Maybe they're not even that radical. Maybe some of these steps that can be taken. So it's not just about winning an election, but something that actually fundamentally kind of builds a stronger democracy. How do we make that political case? Anyone? Anyone?
Well, to be honest, I think in the UK, in UK, they're thinking about all this because they're all absolutely petrified they're going to lose their seats. So there's nothing like self-interest to do it. So I think I think people are thinking. I mean, I'm surprised how many conversations I'm having around this. I mean, the deliberative, deliberative mechanisms. I think they're expensive. They're time-consuming. So at a time when resources are tight, you've got to justify that. But they're very effective. I so take the point. Everybody thinks it's just the election once every 5 years. I think that is such a mistake. That's only the tip of a democracy. So involving people in other ways through. I mean, I think the problem with Westminster politics is they do think it all happens in the bubble, and they've just got to stop thinking it happens in the bubble and start sort of, it doesn't, obviously things, when you're talking about benefit cuts or whatever, of course that's important in your community, but take it bottom up. Don't take it out of Westminster. I mean, I'll tell and the other interesting thing, I just want to say this up, at the end of it, 2 out of 3 of Barking residents voted Brexit. This was 2016. And in Westminster, every bloody MP who had a Brexit sort of constituent was saying, you've got to be pro-Brexit, pro-Brexit. I was a Remainer. And because I'd built trust, this was so interesting. I know this is a bit sort of, because I'd built trust, I had permission to disagree with them. And there was a very funny coffee afternoon where I said to them at one stage, we'd finished the thing, and we had 10 minutes left, and we were going back to Westminster to have one of these endless evenings voting on Brexit. And I said, do you want to hear what I'm going to do? And they said, oh, no, Margaret, it is so boring. But they'd given me permission. And I think that's the other thing. So you don't feel you have to follow. I mean, I do think politics is about voice and leadership and all those sort of things. And you don't have to follow. You can actually build that trust and then lead. I don't know what you feel about that.
I totally agree with that. I don't think I spoke to one organisation that spent the last sort of 5 years in the States since Trump came in first on a sort of saving democracy, and he was going back on all of that as a starting point because he just thought it didn't connect with people. Because it's not saving democracy. You lose the purpose and you sound as if you're someone who likes a debate about democracy and likes institutional debates. So it's got to be, I want to deal with the cost of living or whatever the issue is, and we can't do that unless we hear your views, and therefore we need to do democracy in a different way or whatever. So I think you've got to get in through the issues matter most, and they always matter most, and then you use as part of your explanation why the current way of democracy is not working. I think we think sometimes democracy in itself, this big thing, and also I think, and that can make us also complacent about how much needs to change. And we had the problem in Brexit. We ended up defending a Europe that was not defensible and a Brussels that was not defensible. We lost the bit of but we want to reform it because we were pigeonholed as saying we actually like what was going on. And as I say, it was totally indefensible. So we can't be trapped again. And again, one of the critiques of the Democrats is they become the big state, big institutions, defenders of the status quo when people are crying out for a different system because the current one is not working. So we've got to be radical reformers, but for a real purpose.
Eva.
Yeah, if I may add as well, here, especially in Central Eastern Europe, I'm thinking about the sort of democratic innovation and especially the liberative democracy agenda these days from the point of view of the security lens, because you can think about it that, the current democratic system is rather vulnerable for fracture, vulnerable for the populist authoritarian power capture and elements like that. And so we need to improve democracy, we needed to evolve, and we needed to be more suited for the current times because we have all kinds of ways that it can be undermined by malign actors internally and more importantly externally. So to build that democratic resilience, you need to increase the agency of citizens so they have the kind of skills they need to understand what is mis and disinformation and recognize that, to kind of not buy into some of these simple, quick solutions that populist authoritarians propose. And you can only flex that democratic muscle by giving them, citizens, the opportunity to actually practice that empathy, listening, advocating, discussing, deliberating, coming up with things together. So I think one way of thinking about that is through that defense security type of resilient lens.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. I've got so many more questions, but actually I'm going to stop there and open it up to the floor. If you have a question for any or all of our speakers, please put your hand up. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, just say your name, where you're from. Please don't grandstand. Please ask a question. That would be most helpful because then we can get through quite a few. We can hear from lots of different people. Yeah, go for it. In fact, we'll take three. Sorry, we'll take 1, 2, 3.
I mean, it's very good to hear from the political classes what they think is wrong about democracy, but are we asking the right people about this? Shouldn't we be asking those people that are disenfranchised, those people that feel excluded, campaigners like this guy over here that's not been listened to? Shouldn't we be asking them? Because it sounds a bit like kind of asking sheepdogs about sheep welfare rather than asking the sheep. Oh, my name's Mikey, I'm from the People Speak. Yeah, so are we asking the right people is the question.
Hi, thank you all. My question's my name is Shuaib Gamal. I work for the Future Governance Forum, but I also work with Peter on the Populism Project. My question is for Baroness Hodge.
Margaret.
I found, was it
Margaret.
Margaret, sorry. Where did I get Hodge from? I
No,
apologise.
she's right. She's just saying call her by the first name.
Oh, cool. Oh, okay. I thought Baroness was
I
your
hate
first
the
name.
Baroness.
You have to get used to the Baroness. You are a Baroness, you know.
Sorry, my ladies and my lords. But you said it wasn't apathy that was keeping people at home. It was anger, and that was with BNP. It feels like politics has become more tribal now, and with the Republican Party now, it doesn't matter what they do. And I'm trying to get. I had this conversation with colleagues recently. It doesn't matter what reform does with Doge. It doesn't matter if they're effective or not. People are going to vote for reform because it has become tribal. What you were able to do was make something that seemed like, you mentioned that 11 out of the 12 councillors that won. It seems like you made something that was quite tribal dissipate in a short period of time. Do you think, or it wasn't tribal, sorry, it was more emotional at that time and it was more anger-based? If things do become more tribal with reform, is there anything we can do differently, or is it a completely different, does your story become less effective, essentially?
Thanks. It's a fantastic talk. Thanks so much. Peter, you did School 21, didn't you? Yeah, this is one of the best headmasters I've ever worked with, by the way. I did 2 active citizenship projects there. They were brilliant. It's very straightforward. I'm totally into what Yeva's talking about. I'm obsessed by citizens' assemblies. I'm one of the people who set up the first global citizen assembly. There's this amazing research that I'd love to get your feedback about, right? It's Germany originally in 2023, and now recently from Sortition Foundation about reform in this country. It indicates that the demographic most likely to switch to citizens' assemblies and sortitions when they are able to fully understand it are the demographic in Germany currently going to the AfD and the demographic currently joining reform in this country at the moment, right? 69% of reform would switch to citizens' assemblies and sortition when they learn about exactly how they work. I think that's amazing and exciting, and I want to know what you guys think about it, basically. Oh, Jamie Kelsey, by the way. Jamie Kelsey.
Yeah.
One world or none.
Brilliant. So we've got 3 questions there. So are we asking the right people these questions? And no, they're not in the room, but kind of who do we need to be asking, and what should we, who are we, should we be, oh, I've asked the question. You asked the question, it was fine. Who should we be asking? And how can we kind of, if the way that politics is done, or the way that you did it, Margaret, can be tribal, how can we do it differently from that? Or is there a different way of doing it? And how do we get over the fact that the demographic, or what do we need to do about the fact that the demographic who are most likely to believe in citizen assemblies are also going to vote reform? Is there a problem there, or is that in fact not a problem at all?
So they would switch to
Mm.
assemblies instead of far right.
Switch to assemblies as what? Just
To move towards considering a completely revamp of our system rather than follow a populist party.
right.
It's amazing.
That
Right.
is amazing.
Yeah.
Do you want to go?
I mean, I don't answer the first question. I guess if you, sorry, I don't answer your question at all because I'm obviously the wrong person.
I mean, you've talked to lots of people out on the street, but shouldn't we be asking them
Well,
what they
half of
they
my
want to improve democracy?
half my message has been to you. You've got to communicate and listen, right, and then act on what they say. So, but as a leader, as an elected personage, that I see that as my role. So it's not my role to tell them what to think. It's my role is to listen to them, but lead. I do think I keep banging on about it. I think politicians' voice is hugely important, which is why on immigration we could lead a different discourse if we chose so to do. I've no idea where I sort of sit there and think a lot. We got back the white working class vote. That's what we had to do. We had to get back lost the white working class vote, and we got it back. And I'm really proud of that. Now, would it work today? There was no social media in those days. I mean, I just got a load of bigoted letters and phone calls and those things. There's no social media, and that would have made a difference. And it was probably, it wasn't as mainstream then as it is today. Will that make a difference? I don't know, but I still think that as a I think we just do politics wrong. I think we live in our I live in the Labour Party. I love the Labour Party. I'm completely tribally Labour. But, talking to each other and living in whether it's the Labour Party bubble or the trade union bubble or the Westminster bubble, it's just wrong. You've just got to redo how to. But I've no idea whether it's enough. And, in the past, I mean, I was the only person at the end of it. You must remember, 2010 this was. Labour was not popular by 2010. We never used the term Labour. In almost any of our literature. And I think somebody told me the other day that I was one of the only people who got a swing to Labour, out of it. So it did do something. Is it enough? No. And, things, I think all this stuff about citizens' assemblies or whatever, hugely, hugely important. Getting buy-in to that, people are all in a hurry. I mean, Peter will remember this as well. If you're a minister, you think you're only there for a year. Bloody hell, doing a proper citizenship assembly takes you a good year to organise and listen and, to have all that maybe less. But you're always in a hurry because you want to do the change because you think you won't be there next week. You know, there's a sort of and reconciling that. But and I so strongly believe, you know, I was voted in. Just what happened on one day by perhaps 60% of the people in your constituency, thinking that gives you a mandate to do what you want is bollocks, really.
There's something that needs to change, and it's quite hard to get from A to B about, as you're saying, Margaret, authenticity of politicians. So if you take MPs just being sort of lobby fodder, is not sustainable. You've got to be able to properly speak in an authentic way for your constituency, and it's then got to be hard. Rather than just sort of being whipped into action on everything, you've then, as they do, you look, there are flaws in the American system, but they know that a Democrat, if they're in a particular state with a particular population, they're going to vote a certain way. And you've got to win them over through argument and through negotiation and all the rest of it in order to get their vote, rather than just saying, you know, putting the fear of God in people and all the rest of it. So authenticity really matters. It was interesting at the last election on the doorstep how the number of people who said, I'm weighing up whether to vote Green or Reform, which was very counterintuitive in a way, but not when you think this was sort of damning the main parties and wanting some alternative that was disrupting. And the fact that they could go either way, but the main property of each or quality of each was that they were disruptive, means there's something else going on here about, as we've said a few times in this discussion, about the clunkiness of mainstream parties and how they're not agile enough and how they don't convey disruption and how they become complacent. So I think all of that matters. I remember your projects well, Jamie, from School 21, and that's working with students, just as an example of how they get a sense of their agency, how at a young age, and we really believed in that, you can go out into the local community and actually change lives for people. And if you get that at school, that sense that my life can have an effect, it's a very important infectious thing. So I'm totally in favour. I think there's a block, and we've got to be honest about it. Citizens' assemblies have appeared in the past as if they're a sort of think tank confection that MPs then think is somehow undermining their authority. And I think now there are so many good examples. I gave Taiwan. There's a lot of other examples around the world of people who've used it effectively. And the needs of saving democracy are so much more urgent that it does need a bit of a rebrand in some ways, but it's got to feel like now it is absolutely part of the solution. And I think that can happen.
Yeah, perhaps just wanted to comment on the interesting statistics that was shared with us. I think that kind of makes total sense. For example, that people feel most disillusioned, like the AfD voters in Germany would be completely on board with citizens' assembly, kind of with a more systematic use of citizens' assemblies. I was part of a team working on a citizens' assembly in 2 museums in Germany in 2023. One in Bonn and one in Dresden, and the one in Dresden, we did have a very kind of significant turnout of AfD voters as well within the Citizens' Assembly. They were just as likely, if not even more likely, to accept the assembly invitation. So in a way, to me, this just speaks directly to the fact that the need that these groups have is satisfied through this type of political engagement. So it just encourages to do it more. And I think the problem right now with citizens' assemblies is their more ad hoc nature. And we need to learn more from places like Paris or Ostbelgien or Brussels, where citizens' assemblies have become embedded in more permanent structural ways, where they're also kind of done in a more organized way, which then starts costing less, helps build capacity in-house to do citizens' assemblies. So the more you connect them to the political system, the more they become a kind of a habit, part of it, and also part of the mechanism that is easier and cheaper to run and more familiar to people. And clearly it's been working because those places continue engaging citizens in such a way, and in a way you also then can enable citizens not only to come and deliberate on a question that's been raised for them, but also you can empower them through a more permanent structure to follow up on the outcomes of those citizens' assemblies as well, to hold other parts of the political system more accountable, and potentially set the agenda on what kind of questions should be discussed in citizens' assemblies as well, creating another channel of that bottom-up agenda setting. So I'm kind of, in a way, hopeful that these type of mechanisms can be new kinds of democratic institutions that are going to help us address some of the biggest challenges in democracy.
Thank you. I'd say that statistic just gives me like vast amounts of hope. It's like, I think that's absolutely brilliant, because what it means is that people aren't fundamentally attracted to particular policy positions. They just want their voice to be heard and their voice to make a difference. It's like, well, any political party can do that if you use the right techniques and mechanisms. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. For lady here and gentleman just here.
Hello, I'm Carrie. I'm a connector of people, ideas and strategy, and I've done a bit of work in the deliberative space, most recently contributing to an incubator looking at the responsible use of deliberative technologies and how we can encourage that. And I think one of the things we haven't spoken about, and I'd love to hear about, is whether there are innovations in terms of the tools that we use, the technologies that we use, and how people are interacting these days that might be useful in this space. One is particularly around being able to change your mind and being valued for changing your mind, and I think that's something that perhaps politicians don't do often enough when they have the need to. And the other thing was some recent results from the Skills and Employment Survey of people's motivation and well-being at work around how much influence they feel they have, the level of participation they have. And I wonder again if there are lessons we could learn across the piece. But really, are there any more radical, innovative ideas using all the wonders that the modern world has to offer that we can use to help in this space?
Yeah, Neil Wilson, councillor in Newham, and it may be because I've been 40 years in local politics there that we've had this discussion in this very room about participative democracy and citizens' assemblies, and we've had various models, and I don't think they necessarily always have to be expensive. And we had the latest one at Camden in terms of the use of AI to get more people consulted, for instance, on adult social care as quite a big issue. My question to the panel is, rather than looking one side of this to the other side of the Atlantic, the European models, which I think are far more sophisticated and with more checks and balances, do include a subsidiarity right from the start. And it is so often the case that we're talking in national politics terms, reinforced by national media. And so I want to say, how do we ensure people like me, councillors, whatever role we're doing, and we do knock on doors and we don't wait for 4 years. You know, we're elected in London every 4 years. But it is that, how do we make certain, in an age of 24/7 media, that we get national politicians realising that the local issues, as Margaret has said, I think, you know, the interaction of those, it's so often in the discourse of what's happening over in America or what's happening somewhere else. That doesn't actually add to the issues of listening to people. Yes, it may be tiresome to listen about the amount of rubbish that I know already is at the end of my road by the time I get back there, by the way. I live amongst it. And I think that we have a rather top-down superiority if we're not careful by saying, you know, it always has to be out of Westminster. My last point, and this is probably not a question, but just a statement as an educator, it would be rather helpful if people who say about lived experience did have, before they did some policy making, some lived experience rather than going into what I think was described as a bubble mentality. But that's just a slight bias.
Over to you guys.
I mean, I was going to raise I can't really answer the innovation stuff. I'm sure you guys are probably better on that. And I do agree that we've got a very centralised system of in the UK, and it's it's a constant struggle. I was just going to raise one other issue which we haven't talked about. It. You may feel it's raising it at the wrong point, but it just struck me as well. I mean, part of it is we've lost political integrity as well, and you know. Work I did just before the general election, 3.5 million quid went into the Tory party from Russian kleptocrats and oligarchs. One of our Labour MPs took 500,000 from the Chinese. I think sort of there is something as well that needs to be done in that whole rebuilding trust agenda about political integrity. And I really regret the fact that the Labour government hasn't done that in its first session of Parliament. There's been a whole agenda then who gets put in the House of Lords, dare I say, and sort of all that.
Totally right. Very good decision.
But and who gets an honour, who gets the positions, all that political integrity agenda, I think, is another part of this whole thing that we won't talk about this afternoon, but it's the funding of political parties is hugely, hugely important. Slightly off.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. In answer to technology, I mean, it's already been mentioned, and I'm slightly obsessed with Taiwan at the moment as I'm looking into it. So I'm going to use Taiwan as well. But, what Audrey Town was saying was that she's got her 450 people in 45 rooms of 10, each facilitated by AI, and then she aggregates it. So all of that now you can do at a far bigger scale and get almost the groups to self-regulate themselves and then collect it together. So there's a lot of ways in which that can be done. I think we need massive devolution. To give one example in an area I'm familiar with, education. I mean, Greater Manchester's got 200 secondary schools. I think Andy Burnham would be more skilled at running those than the DFE. In fact, I'm certain of that. So we've got to just devolve so much more out, and Westminster's just got to let go because it is a way of rebuilding trust. And of course, it's a vicious circle because you don't get often the local leaders becoming mayors. Sometimes you do, but you don't get your best politicians staying local. They come to Westminster unless you give them proper powers. So then you get a virtuous circle of people thinking that is a great job for me to go to, and actually the pinnacle of my career, not a stepping stone to something else. And that's what you want from devolution. So that ought to happen. On changing mind, and it links to integrity as well. We're still not learning some of the basic rules of communication. If you take the winter fuel, the sort of U-turn, you've got to say it's a U-turn because you've got to get credit for it. You've got to say, I have listened. I am a listening politician. I am doing a U-turn. Politicians still don't want to say they're doing a U-turn. You want to shout about doing a U-turn because it shows that you're actually willing to listen. You're willing to change your mind. You get it. You get the anger about it. As opposed to implying, well, we were always going to U-turn at a point when, so you've got a changing mind is a good thing as long as you don't do it kind of every 5 minutes. Yeah.
David, do you want to fin?
In terms of kind of innovation, I think about it maybe in like several different buckets. So one, I guess, would be tools, and then clearly there would be the AI right now and all the different ways that we can use it to both involve more people and have better quality facilitation or help identify through participation and deliberation some emerging threads that lead to a consensus. So I think there's going to be a wealth of opportunity for reaching people beyond the room and better facilitating and doing things cheaper. But to me, what's also interesting and what I consider innovations is who are we representing and who do we consider important to be represented. And there are lots of different initiatives I find where now we're representing also the natural world in different ways by allowing it rights or impersonating or representing in different political institutions. Then children, there have been citizens' assemblies, quite a few of them, where children from schools were participating, deliberating. Future generations as well, especially in Japan, there's this sort of future scoping technique where you're focusing on, you're kind of imagining then and thinking about the needs of future generations and how that plays into the decision making today. And so I guess it's kind of how we think about that innovation, and just I think it's important to remember that all these new technical possibilities that we have right now, they're not the only way of making something better and of innovating, but we need to think a bit more structurally. What are some of the other ways we're opening this up?
Thank you. And with that, we're just about at time. Before I kind of close us off, though, I just want to use Chair's privilege to say that in terms of innovation, I would direct you towards the WAVES programme that Demos has just launched, because it is all about how do you use AI and tech to enable more people to take part in more democratic decisions, just to make it a bit easier, cheaper, faster for local authorities to do, because it is so important that local people are listened to on all these massive issues. So please go look at that. We're trying to find the ways forward right now. I want to say a huge thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Carnegie UK and to Impact on Urban Health, who are very kindly funding the Collaborative Democracy Network this year, so a big thanks to them. A huge thanks to all of you for your questions and for being part of this discussion. I hope you will stay around. We will have drinks and snacks and networking and chatting and talking about all of these issues for the next 40 or so minutes, so please stay around and kind of continue the conversation. But lastly, a very, very huge thank you to our amazing panel, Yeva, Peter and Margaret. Thank you so much for not just sharing what the fears are and what the crises are in democracy, but also thinking about what some of those future changes that could be made that actually they feel, it's not rocket science, but it is radical. Some of the stuff that can be done, and it can be done now in order to kind of bolster and strengthen the foundations of our democratic system. So thank you for giving us some hope that there are things that can be done. Thank you very much.
Very interesting, those questions.
Hi, Yeva. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. She can't have a drink.
Thank you.
All right. Very different. We were very different.
Yeah, no, it's good.